The courtroom erupted in laughter. Judge Raymond Carter leaned back, smirking at the frail elderly woman standing before him. "Ma'am, are you lost?" he mocked. "This is a court of law, not a knitting club." More laughter. Some lawyers exchanged smug glances. But the woman? She didn't even blink. Instead, she adjusted her blazer and calmly said, "I strongly advise you to choose your words carefully, Your Honor." The laughter died instantly. A few whispers spread. Even the stenographer paused. Judge Carter chuckled. But this time, it sounded forced. "Oh, and why is that?" The woman took a step forward, eyes sharp as steel. "Because I have won more cases than you have ever presided over, Judge Carter. And you just made a very big mistake." Silence. Gasps. Judge Carter's smirk vanished. And in that moment, he realized he was in serious trouble. The courtroom buzzed with energy, a low murmur of voices filling the air. Attorneys shuffled papers, clerks typed away, and the judge's gavel rested idly on its podium. Then, the laughter started. Judge Raymond Carter leaned back in his grand leather chair, his smirk stretching wide across his face. He let out a mocking chuckle, shaking his head as if he had just heard the most ridiculous joke of his career. His amusement was directed at one person, the elderly woman standing calmly in the center of the courtroom. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun, her beige suit crisp but simple. She carried no air of intimidation, no flashy gestures, just a quiet, steady presence. But Judge Carter? He saw her as nothing more than a joke. He let out an exaggerated sigh, flipping through his notes lazily before slamming the file shut. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm, "are you lost?" The courtroom burst into laughter again. Even the young attorneys in the front row nudged each other, shaking their heads in amusement. The bailiff had to clear his throat to suppress a grin. But the elderly woman didn't move. She didn't react. She simply stood there, poised and composed, as if she had seen this all before. Judge Carter drummed his fingers against the bench, shaking his head. "I've seen a lot in my time. But this? An old woman? Standing in my courtroom, thinking she can actually defend herself?" He chuckled, looking at the gallery as if expecting applause. "Tell me," he continued, crossing his arms, "did you wander in looking for your grandkids? Or maybe you thought this was the knitting club?" The laughter grew louder. The mockery spread like wildfire, whispers bouncing off the marble walls. But then, something shifted. The elderly woman finally moved. She tilted her head ever so slightly, her piercing gaze locking onto the judge. For the first time, Judge Carter felt a strange unease creep up his spine. She was unshaken, unbothered. And then, in a voice so steady, her eyes sent a chill through the room. She spoke. "Your Honor," she said, "I strongly advise you to choose your words carefully." The laughter died instantly. A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread across the courtroom. Even the cocky young lawyers in the front row shifted in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. The stenographer paused mid-typing, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Judge Carter scoffed, though there was a forced edge to his voice now. "Oh? And why is that?" The elderly woman took a single step forward, adjusting the lapels of her jacket with slow, deliberate precision. Then, in a voice laced with calm authority, she said, "Because I have won more cases than you have ever presided over, Judge Carter. And you just made a very big mistake." A hush fell over the room. Judge Carter's smirk faded. The murmurs swelled, growing louder, spreading like wildfire. Someone whispered, "Wait, who is she?" A young lawyer leaned over to his colleague, voice hushed but urgent. "Did she just say she has won more cases than he's presided over?" Judge Carter's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening around his gavel. "Who exactly do you think you are?" he asked, his voice no longer mocking, but defensive. The elderly woman straightened her posture, her shoulders squared with an air of confidence that only came with decades of experience. "I am Eleanor Lawson," she said, her voice carrying through the courtroom like a storm. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps exploded from the gallery. The prosecutor's face drained of color. One of the younger attorneys in the front row actually dropped his pen. Judge Carter stiffened, his jaw tightening as realization hit him like a freight train. He knew that name. Everyone in the legal world knew that name. And now, Judge Carter knew he had just mocked one of the most legendary attorneys in the country, right in front of an entire courtroom. And there was no undoing it. A strange tension swallowed the courtroom whole. The walls, once filled with laughter and mockery, now echoed with uneasy silence. Judge Carter's smirk had stiffened, frozen in place like a mask he no longer knew how to wear. The name Eleanor Lawson carried weight. More weight than he had ever anticipated. Whispers spread like wildfire, bouncing from one person to another. Wait, did she just say Eleanor Lawson? No way. Not that Eleanor Lawson, right? A young attorney in the front row shifted in his seat, nudging his colleague. Dude, she's a legend. I studied her cases in law school. The prosecutor, Thomas Bennett, was no fool. His brows furrowed, a flicker of realization settling deep in his eyes. He had heard of Eleanor Lawson before. Her victories, her reputation, and most importantly, her disappearances. She had vanished from the legal world decades ago. No cases, no interviews, no appearances in any major trials. But now, she stood before them, poised and unshaken, facing a judge who had just humiliated himself beyond repair. Judge Carter forced a laugh, though it sounded unnatural, laced with the tiniest hint of nerves. All right, let's settle down, he said, waving his hand dismissively. He tried to regain control, tried to act as if the moment hadn't shifted against him. But it had, and everyone in the room felt it. The bailiff, once barely containing his laughter, suddenly cleared his throat. His expression shifted, stiffening into something more professional, almost apologetic. The energy in the room had changed, and even he could sense it. Judge Carter leaned forward, gripping his gavel tightly, his amusement now replaced with something colder. Let's get something straight, he said, his voice clipped. I don't care what rumors are flying around this courtroom. He narrowed his eyes. I want proof. The air grew thick. Eleanor tilted her head, her lips pressing together in the faintest hint of a knowing smile. You want proof? She asked. Judge Carter scoffed, though there was less arrogance now, and more desperation. Yes, ma'am. If you're really who you claim to be, then prove it. Show me your credentials. Eleanor moved with precision, no hesitation, as she reached into her beige leather case. The room held its breath. She pulled out a single document. Then, with the utmost grace, she slid it across the table. Judge Carter snatched it, his fingers gripping the paper tightly. His eyes scanned the document once, then twice. Then, his face lost all color. His fingers trembled slightly as he read her credentials. Not just as a lawyer, not just as an attorney with decades of experience, but as a former chief zoning attorney, a former senior prosecutor, and one of the most celebrated legal minds in the state's history. Judge Carter's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The courtroom remained silent, the audience waiting, expecting him to recover. But he didn't. He couldn't. Because in that moment he knew. He had just mocked one of the most powerful attorneys of his generation, and he had done it in front of an entire courtroom. The shift in the room was palpable. The mockery was gone. The smug confidence was crumbling. And Judge Carter, he was feeling it. The once proud and untouchable judge, who had spent years belittling those beneath him, now felt the weight of the courtroom turn against him. The whispers grew louder. Low murmurs at first, but soon, phones were pulled out. Cameras were recording. The young attorneys in the front row, their smirks were gone, replaced with widened eyes and exchanged glances. Even the bailiff, who had barely contained his amusement earlier, now stood rigid, his stance shifting ever so slightly toward Eleanor instead of Carter. The prosecutor, Thomas Bennett, leaned back in his chair and smirked, because he knew Judge Carter was losing control of his own courtroom, and there was nothing he could do about it. Carter clenched his jaw, forcing himself to regain composure. This is absurd, he muttered, gripping the document in his hand a little too tightly. I don't care what this paper says. It doesn't change the fact that this woman is standing here acting like she still holds authority in my courtroom. Eleanor, she didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't react at all. She merely folded her hands in front of her, watching him with a level of patience that felt more dangerous than anger. Then, she moved. Reaching into her case, she pulled out another document. She placed it on the table, gently, before sliding it forward, inch by inch. Your Honor, she said, her voice smooth, firm, and unwavering. I would strongly suggest you read this next. Judge Carter hesitated. He didn't want to play into her game, didn't want to acknowledge that he was even slightly unsettled. But the entire courtroom was watching, recording, so he had no choice. His fingers snatched the paper, a little too aggressively. His eyes scanned it once, Then, everything stopped. Judge Carter froze. His breathing hitched, because right there, in clear, undeniable print, was her legal record, her title, her history of major cases, her long list of legal victories that spanned longer than his entire career. And the final detail? The one that sent an ice-cold chill straight through his spine? Eleanor Lawson had once been a judge herself. Gasps exploded through the gallery. Even the jury, who had been silent observers all this time, leaned forward. Phones zoomed in, capturing the way Judge Carter's fingers trembled. The prosecutor's smirk widened, because this wasn't just a power shift anymore. This was a downfall. Judge Carter's face burned. His lips parted, but no words came out. He was still searching for a way out, trying to grasp onto the authority that was slipping through his fingers like sand. And then, Eleanor spoke. "Now, Your Honor," she began, her tone cool but sharp as a blade. "Since you are so keen on questioning my credentials, I believe it is only fair that I question yours." The courtroom inhaled. Judge Carter's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" he barked, trying to mask the panic creeping into his voice. Eleanor tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I assume, as a judge, you have a firm understanding of legal precedent." Judge Carter stiffened. "Of course I do." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Good. Then you are aware that publicly ridiculing a former judge in open court without cause falls under judicial misconduct, correct?" Boom. A collective murmur ran through the room. The prosecutor let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. The jury exchanged looks, some of them already convinced of who the real authority was in the room. Judge Carter's jaw tightened. His gavel came down hard, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Enough of this nonsense. I will not stand for these baseless accusations." Eleanor simply raised an eyebrow. "Baseless?" She gestured toward the courtroom. "Ask them, Your Honor. Ask if what just happened here today was appropriate behavior from a man in your position." Judge Carter glanced around, saw the whispers, the smirks, the cameras, and worst of all, the way no one was on his side anymore. Judge Carter swallowed, tried to compose himself. I think we've had enough interruptions for one day," he stammered, gripping his gavel. "We will continue with this case," but he wasn't the one in control anymore. Eleanor took a step forward, not aggressively, not intimidatingly, just enough to make him feel the weight of her presence. "This is no longer about a simple case, Your Honor." Judge Carter's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Eleanor's voice remained calm, deadly calm. "This is about respect." She straightened her blazer. "And you, sir, have just lost all of yours." Silence. Judge Carter's face was flushed with humiliation. His gavel sat useless in his hands. And for the first time since the trial began, the courtroom didn't belong to him anymore. The room held its breath. Then, the screen flickered to life. The courtroom security footage began to play, and every single person in the room turned to watch. The video was crystal clear. Judge Carter's face, his mocking tone, his condescending laughter, the arrogance dripping from his every word, and most damning of all, the moment he insulted Eleanor Lawson. "This is a court of law, not a knitting club." The line boomed through the speakers. The gallery winced. Even the bailiff, who had once laughed, now looked away, shame creeping into his expression. The footage continued. Every single sneer, every gesture dripping with disrespect, every moment of public humiliation he had inflicted on Eleanor. It was all there, played in high definition, for everyone to see. And seated in the back row, watching with sharp, assessing eyes, were three individuals Judge Carter had failed to notice earlier. The Bar Association representatives, and they did not look pleased. Judge Carter stiffened. His fingers curled around his gavel as if it could somehow shield him. The prosecutor, Thomas Bennett, leaned forward and smirked. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction, "I move to officially file a complaint against you for judicial misconduct." Boom. Judge Carter's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" Bennett didn't even blink. He simply turned to the Bar Association representatives. "Ladies and gentlemen, I trust you have seen enough evidence to warrant an inquiry." One of them, a woman in a sharp navy suit, nodded slowly. Her gaze never left Carter's face. "We have." Judge Carter's face burned. This was not happening. This was his courtroom. This was his domain. And now, he was being put on trial in front of everyone. A storm of murmurs erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones, already rushing out of the courtroom to break the scandal. The camera zoomed in, capturing the sweat forming on Carter's brow, the tight clench of his jaw, and across from him, Eleanor Lawson sat still, composed, unshaken. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't revel in his downfall. She simply watched, because she didn't need to do anything. Judge Carter was burying himself. His voice was strained, desperate for control. This is ridiculous, he barked. I was merely conducting my courtroom as I always have. This woman— He gestured at Eleanor, but he couldn't even finish the sentence, because he knew that if he said another word, it would only dig his grave deeper. And Eleanor? She finally spoke. Your Honor, she said, her voice smooth. I strongly suggest you remain silent. The room inhaled sharply, because there it was, the final power shift. For the first time in his courtroom, Judge Carter had been commanded to be quiet, and worse, he had no choice but to listen. His fingers trembled around the gavel. The Bar Association took notes, their gazes sharp, their whispers unforgiving. Judge Carter tried one last time, one final desperate attempt to stop this train wreck. This trial is over, he declared, slamming his gavel down hard. But the prosecutor? He simply shook his head. No, Judge Carter. He smiled, cold, calculated. Your career is over. Silence. Carter's breath shook. The weight of those words landed like a blow. His reputation, his authority, his untouchable status, all of it, gone. Because for the first time, Judge Carter realized he was the one on trial. The courtroom was frozen in silence. Every eye in the room was fixed on Eleanor Lawson. The once laughing young attorneys, the gallery filled with observers, even the cocky prosecutor who had smirked at her earlier, now sat still, watching history unfold. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of the moment pressing down on every soul present. Judge Carter, the once confident and arrogant ruler of this courtroom, looked like a man who had just woken up in the middle of a nightmare. His usual smirk was gone. His jaw clenched tightly. His fingers twitched as he gripped his gavel, but for the first time, he hesitated to use it. Eleanor took a step forward, her movement slow, deliberate. The sharp tap of her heels against the wooden floor echoed through the vast courtroom, each step a reminder of the power shift that had taken place. Carter exhaled sharply, his voice strained but still laced with stubbornness. Miss Lawson, I believe we may have had a misunderstanding. A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the room. A misunderstanding? That was the best he could come up with? The same judge who had humiliated her moments ago, who had treated her like an irrelevant relic of the past, was now scrambling to save face. Eleanor, unbothered by his feeble attempt, tilted her head slightly. A misunderstanding? She repeated, her voice calm, controlled. Is that what you call belittling a woman before she has even spoken? Mocking her credentials before reading them? Or dismissing decades of legal experience based on an assumption? Carter swallowed hard. From the jury box, one of the members leaned forward, clearly intrigued. The courtroom doors creaked as a few more reporters rushed in, their cameras now focused on the face of the man who had once ruled this court with unchecked arrogance. Carter began, but he faltered. He had no words. He was drowning, and there was no way out. Eleanor took another step forward, her eyes never leaving his. Power doesn't come from a title, Your Honor, she said, her voice unwavering. It comes from respect, and you lost yours today. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Carter's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The words he wanted to say, the defense he wanted to build for himself, none of it would matter now. The damage was done. The bailiff suddenly stiffened as his earpiece buzzed. He nodded, taking a step forward. Your Honor, he said, clearing his throat. There has been an official order for a judicial review regarding your conduct in this case. Carter flinched. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his gavel, as if holding on to it would somehow undo everything. But it wouldn't. The gavel wasn't his power anymore. The whispering in the courtroom grew louder. Some lawyers exchanged glances, others subtly shook their heads. The arrogance Carter had carried for years had finally collapsed in real time, and everyone in this room had witnessed it. Eleanor's expression never changed. She did not smirk, she did not gloat. She had won, and she didn't need to celebrate. Victory, after all, wasn't about proving herself. It was about reminding the world that underestimation had always been her greatest weapon. Judge Carter slowly sat back in his chair, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his own downfall. The confidence, the control, The power he had once commanded. It had all vanished in a single afternoon. Eleanor turned without another word. The sound of her footsteps was deafening in the quiet room as she walked toward the exit. Reporters rushed to follow her, their voices overlapping as they fired off rapid questions. "Miss Lawson, how do you feel about this decision? Did you expect this outcome? What will you do next?" Eleanor didn't stop. She didn't answer. As she reached the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom, she paused, only for a second. The moment stretched, as if time itself was waiting for her final move. Then, she pushed open the doors and stepped outside, leaving behind the chaos, the cameras, and a fallen judge who had just learned the most important lesson of his career. Respect is not given. It is earned. And she had just earned hers. Again. Flashes erupted from every direction. The courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters, their voices overlapping in a frenzy. Cameras clicked nonstop, capturing every angle of the disgraced Judge Carter as he exited the courtroom. His face pale, his once confident stride now hesitant. The headlines were already circulating. Judge Carter's arrogance exposed in courtroom showdown. Mockery turns to humiliation. Veteran attorney Eleanor Lawson destroys corrupt judge. Judicial review launched. Carter's career in jeopardy. Carter's face, once filled with smug superiority, was now the face of public disgrace. His name was trending for all the wrong reasons. As he stepped onto the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed him. Microphones were shoved toward his face. "Judge Carter, do you have a statement on the allegations? Are you stepping down from the bench? Will you fight the judicial review?" Carter said nothing. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his lips pressed into a thin line. There was no smirk left, no arrogance. Just a man who had lost everything in a matter of hours. Then the attention shifted. The doors of the courthouse swung open again, and the crowd turned. Eleanor Lawson stepped out. Unlike Carter, she was poised, calm, in control. The energy of the reporters shifted immediately. They surged toward her, cameras flashing, voices calling out her name. "Miss Lawson, how does it feel to take down Judge Carter? Did you expect this outcome? What will you do next?" Eleanor paused on the steps, letting the noise settle. Then, with perfect ease, she turned to the nearest microphone. A hush fell over the crowd. She smirked. Then, in a voice steady and unshaken, she said, "Respect is earned. He never earned it." For a second, there was silence. Then, cheers erupted. The crowd roared in approval. Reporters scrambled to type her words. News anchors repeated them live on air, and social media exploded. Judge Carter stood frozen, his humiliation now complete. "Eleanor?" She turned and walked away. Without another glance, without another word, she left him there, drowning in the wreckage of his own arrogance. And in that moment, Judge Carter knew his career was over.